They changed the gender to male because of Donald Trump. It's official, y'all. I am working with the ACLU to sue the Trump administration.
Just when you think things can't get any more absurd, woke activists hit a new low. We're going to break down a truly wild lawsuit coming from a TikTok influencer who is transgender, teaming up with the ACLU to sue the president. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. We're going to break it down and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, you might remember a couple weeks ago in a bonus episode, I touched on a transgender influencer who was going viral for a video complaining about the fact that under the Trump administration's new rules, she could no longer list her sex on her passport as female because as a trans woman, her sex is actually male, and the Trump administration's policy is that that's no longer allowed. You're no longer allowed to put incorrect information on your government documents. The old Biden era rules, which allowed you to put whatever sex you felt like, or even an X if you said you were non-binary, even though no human being's sex is non-binary, those rules have gone the way of the dodo bird. But this video went viral where a trans woman influencer named Zaya Persian complained about the situation.
In case you're wondering what it's like being transgender under this new administration, I just got my new passport in the mail and they changed the gender to male because of Donald Trump. I'm in danger now. Trust. This is only the beginning, babe. Y'all done pissed off the wrong transformer.
Well, we got a big update and now Zaya is suing with the help of the ACLU, suing the Trump administration. Let's take a look at her video explaining what she's doing and why.
It's official, y'all. I am working with the ACLU to sue the Trump administration. Now, you're probably wondering, why on earth am I suing Donald Trump? Well, you may or may not have seen this video that went kind of viral. So yes, I'm a transgender woman. I applied to renew my passport and have it marked as female, and they refused, and they sent it back to me as male. He does not get to tell me who I am. Only I do. And now I'm at high risk of something bad happening to me if I were to travel abroad. This policy is dangerous, and it is unfair to every single trans, non-binary, or intersex person that there is. I'm an American, and yes, I'm transgender, but I deserve to be able to travel freely without fear or repercussion. We deserve the freedom to be ourselves. And no politician should be able to take that away. This is just a small part of a broad effort by the Trump administration to push trans people out of public life and act like we don't exist. They want to ban our healthcare, censor our speech, control our lives, and I'm not just gonna sit there and let it happen. We're not gonna sit here and let it happen. We deserve better than this because all people deserve better than this. And Donald Trump, we'll see you in court.
She really thought she cooked. We'll see you in court. You will, baby, and you're gonna lose. So there is a lot to unpack from this video. First and foremost, this idea that Trump doesn't get to tell you who you are, you get to decide that. Sort of, but also sort of not. Like, you can feel whatever way you want about yourself, absolutely. But objective reality still does exist. And if you suddenly felt so strongly in your soul that you were truly a cat, the government would not have to affirm in your records that you are in fact a cat. And your gender identity may be as a trans woman, but your biological sex is still male. I've said for a long time, if they wanted to add like a gender identity section on these documents that could say trans woman and then sex, male, that would be fine with me. But biological sex is about the structure of your reproductive system, whether it's oriented towards the production of sperm or egg. And basically every human being, with the rarest of exceptions, with people with rare genetic conditions, is oriented either towards one or the other. They're either male or female, and there are thousands of biological differences that accompany that orientation. And just changing your appearance or how you feel inside, all of that, it's like power to you. Live your best life, whatever will make you happy, but it doesn't actually change your sex. So what you're demanding is the right to put incorrect information on your government documents. That's not a right. Yes, you absolutely have the freedom to be yourself, but you don't have the right to have any perception of yourself affirmed and embraced as fact by others or the government. So you've probably heard about Bitcoin and its consistent growth in value over time. And with inflation eroding the value of the dollar, you've probably wanted to get in on the Bitcoin action, but it just seems so complicated. That's where today's sponsor, Coinbits, makes it incredibly simple. With Coinbits roundups, you don't even have to think about it. Just link your credit cards, debit cards, and bank accounts, and every time you make a purchase, Coinbits automatically rounds it up to the nearest dollar and saves your spare change in Bitcoin. It's literally the easiest way to start stacking Bitcoin. Set it, forget it, and watch it grow. You can sign up and get Bitcoin in less than 3 minutes. You can even set up automated savings plans, like a digital piggy bank that grows with Bitcoin's value. And your Bitcoin belongs to you. Withdraw it to your own wallet and stay in control of your money. Coinbits is family owned and made right here in America with world-class customer support. Stop missing out. Go to coinbits.app/Brad and start stacking Bitcoin effortlessly. That's coinbits.app/Brad or the link in the description or the pinned comment. Guys, this is not financial advice, and be sure to do your own research before making investment decisions. Now, back to today's show. Say, for example, a short man who's like 5'2" wants to put on his driver's license that he's 6'3". They don't have to do that. And they're not violating his rights if they don't. Now, as for the danger part of this,
I'm in danger now.
my heart goes out to this person and I want them to be safe like anyone, but I don't really buy this argument that you have to be able to put incorrect information about your sex on your documents or you're in danger. First and foremost, any country, and there are many countries like this, any country where you would literally be unsafe if it was known that you were transgender is not a country you should be traveling to. Like, that's not safe. I mean, you also have an online presence, so anyone who looked you up would figure it out. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. That doesn't make sense. And I can understand the idea that it would cause potential issues or confusion, that you may appear like a woman, but then your passport or whatever says male. But under your version that you're advocating for, there would be just as much confusion, if not more, because people who don't pass at all can still change their documents. So you have somebody who looks like a man, but their passport says female. So the same issue would still occur, probably at a higher frequency, but it just in the opposite direction. So there's no perfect solution here, and I err on the side of accuracy. Because these things, these concepts, and these records do exist for a reason. This information has to be accurate on government documents, not just for the purposes of identifying people, but also for things like enforcing basic common sense separation between males and females based on biology, not identity, in some contexts, like prisons, like keeping violent, biologically male criminals out of women's prisons. But if people can change their sex on their birth certificate, on their passport, on everything to whatever they feel like, even though can't actually change your literal sex, then that kind of becomes impossible to enforce. And that's crazy and not a path we should be going down. Don't even get me started on the whole non-binary thing. That one, that change, no human being's sex is X, okay? That should have never been an option on your passport. But guys, unless you're very new here, you will not be surprised to see the Lulu coming out from the alphabet community on TikTok. The ACLU, though, pushing patently absurd legal arguments like this is quite something. I mean, it's not that surprising these days because they've fallen off like nobody's business in recent years and become kind of a woke joke, but the absurdity of some of the details of this lawsuit is still something of a new low for them. Here's a video of the main lawyer on the case explaining why they're suing.
We filed another lawsuit against the Trump administration, challenging his executive order restricting transgender, non-binary, and intersex folks from obtaining passports with accurate gender markers. Without accurate IDs, trans people would be restricted from flying, from opening a bank account, from enrolling in school, and so much more. This executive order is one of a wave of actions President Trump has taken against the transgender community and our right to exist, and we will not allow it. We already filed a lawsuit against President Trump's restrictions on transgender healthcare, and we are not slowing down anytime soon.
Now, here's where things get really kind of insane, legally speaking. In their statement accompanying this lawsuit, the ACLU writes, "This lawsuit asserts that the State Department's actions violate transgender, intersex, and non-binary people's rights under the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution for unlawfully restricting their freedom of movement, as well as their rights under the Equal Protection Clause by unjustifiably discriminating against them on the basis of their sex. There's more that we'll get into in a sec, but first let's talk about those 2 points. First, nobody's freedom of movement is being restricted. That doesn't make any sense. They can still get passports. Of course, if the Trump administration was saying trans people can't have passports, aren't allowed to go places, that would be crazy. That'd be discriminatory and it'd be dystopian, and their freedom of movement would be being restricted. But that is not what's happening here. They just have to have documents that correctly state their biological sex, and then they can still travel like anyone else. I genuinely don't understand what they're talking about. And I don't see how it's discriminating against them on the basis of their sex to accurately state their sex. I feel like we're in the upside down world. Like, I'm not living in the same reality as the woke people that wrote this document. And it actually gets somehow even more outlandish and absurd. The policy also violates the First Amendment of the US Constitution by requiring people to have a sex designation on their passport that conflicts with their identity and potentially outs them to others. This violates the First Amendment's protections against being required to convey governmental ideological messages they disagree with. So, I don't think stating a fact counts as an ideological message you're being forced to convey, though I guess I do acknowledge that to some extent the left no longer believes in biological reality when it comes to sex as a category of human distinction. So to that extent, is it ideological? Kind of, but only because they've made facts ideological. But guys, I'm a huge free speech person. That's like one of my core values. I am a diehard First Amendment type. So if their First Amendment rights were actually being violated, I would be defending them. No matter if I agree with you, if I think you're delulu, if I think you're amazing, I still support your First Amendment rights. But this argument that you have a First Amendment right to put incorrect information on your government identification is kind of wild. Like, go back to my example from earlier. If the government, if your local like DMV or whatever, won't let you put the height you identify as on your ID, are they violating your First Amendment rights now, according to the ACLU? If they won't let you put Caucasian when you're black on your documents, is that like an infringement on your freedom of speech? Like, what if somebody who has blue eyes wants to put on their driver's license that they have pink eyes, even though they don't have pink eyes? Do they have a right to force the government to put that incorrect information on that document? And if they don't, then their rights to their identity and their free speech are being violated? That's what they're arguing here. And that's insane. But there's actually a kind of sinister element to this that goes far beyond just one lawsuit or a few trans or non-binary identifying people who want to put stuff on their documents. This really is part and parcel of a broader movement on the progressive left in America that flatly denies the concept of biological sex as it exists. You know, I have friends who are transgender or transsexual, whatever you want to call it, who acknowledge, you know, like, I am a biological female, but I have this mental condition and I want to live as if I'm a male. And so they change their outer exterior. They want to be called he, him. None of that bothers me whatsoever. Like, go for it, knock yourself out within reason. I'll accommodate it. I'll call you what you want to be called. But we all know you're not literally a male just because you feel like one or want to or change your appearance. And my friends, they understand that. Like, they're still in touch with reality. They just want to live in a particular way and have a unique experience. But this other side of this community that is embodied and embraced by like huge swaths of the center left of American politics and the media and these activist organizations literally thinks biological sex is not real or is a social construct or some other absurd farcical idea like that. So much so that almost every Democrat in Congress supports legislation, the Equality Act, that redefines sex under federal law to mean gender identity or self-ID or whatever you feel like, effectively erasing biological reality from federal law. That is something that has some pretty profound ramifications and I think concerning implications for our society and for our country, and something that most people, most just common sense Americans who have no animus towards trans people or anyone else, don't support. And this absurd lawsuit is just the latest example of that ongoing division between those who acknowledge reality and those who are trying to actively deny it. What do you guys think? Do you support this trans woman and her lawsuit? Let me know in the comments below. Do hit that like button and make sure subscribed if you aren't yet. Up next, we got to check in with our friends over in cable news land. This time, MSNBC host Joy Reid, who just made one of the most absurd statements on air on cable news that I've heard in some time, which is saying something, to be clear. Take a listen to this remarkable exchange that Joy Reid had with Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries.
To stop any of this bad stuff from happening, it only takes 3 House Republicans to do the right thing on behalf of the people that they represent, to stand up for children and seniors and people with disabilities and veterans who will be hurt badly by this Republican budget proposal.
But we've seen, Leader Jeffries, that there aren't 3. There aren't any. If Donald Trump announced tomorrow that he was selling the United States to Vladimir Putin personally and that we will now be owned by the Kremlin, every single Republican would say, yes, sir, and vote for it. We already have seen their behavior. We've stopped, I think most of us have stopped expecting any different behavior from them.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to suggest very humbly that if Trump, which he wouldn't do this is a crazy hypothetical example to even go for, but if Trump tried to sell America to Putin to have us become a colony of Russia or whatever the heck Miss Joy Reid just described, that most Republicans wouldn't, in fact, go along with that. I do absolutely acknowledge that our politics has become tribal and extremely polarized to the extent that people on both sides are just tempted to defend or embrace anything their side does, but there's limits. And we have seen Republican lawmakers disagree with Trump on everything from tariffs to different nominees. And if he tried to literally betray and dissolve our country and sell it to the Russians, they would not go along with that. Now, you could say maybe Miss Joy here was being hyperbolic, maybe she was exaggerating, but I really, with the number of unhinged statements this woman has made about Trump and Russia over the years, I really don't think so. I think she probably was basically serious. And there's a couple interesting takeaways to that. One, maybe this is me being naive, but imagine we lived in America where a Democrat lawmaker would say, come on now, Joy, we disagree with Trump on all sorts of things, but he wouldn't literally betray us to the Russians. My Republican colleagues would not go along with that. But no, they don't defend each other at all, really. They don't have kind of any sort of good faith towards each other, even to that small degree anymore these days. And 2, they really have learned nothing. They made so many, when Trump was president the first time, they made so many outrageous claims and statements about Russia, his ties to Russia, many of which ended up being unfounded and untrue or exaggerated. And that kind of didn't land. It did not hit the way they thought it hit. It clearly did not end Trump's political career, did not cut into his support. And you'd think they would learn their lesson, these liberal media hosts who tried to take him down with this stuff. No, they're just doing more of the same. They're just saying, you know what, we have to just ratchet it up to even more extreme and unhinged rhetoric about Trump and Russia, because if we just go harder on this, it'll work this time. That's the definition of insanity. But I guess that makes it kind of par for the course for Joy Reid's commentary. On a similar note, I want to react to this really bizarre and kind of funny, but also kind of depressing clip of a Democratic member of Congress making a truly absurd statement.
I met with a manufacturing company, but they also are engaged in getting young people more engaged in manufacturing. So I asked them, so how many of those students that are signing up and want to do this, how many are women? And they said, well, I know there's at least 13% or something. It was a low number. And you had mentioned trying to engage more women in manufacturing. I'm just wondering if just the name manufacturing sounds like a guy.
Y'all, this Democratic Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky from Illinois, actually just suggested with a straight face at a hearing in Congress that part of the reason there's underrepresentation of women in manufacturing may be because the name is manufacturing and sounds like a guy. Babe, what? Did you hit the crack pipe before heading to Congress this morning? She cannot be serious with this. Like, one, I really had hoped that Democrats were over the hyper woke identity stuff, but they just seem to keep going and doubling down on it at every turn, just from absurdity to absurdity. This stuff does not resonate with the public. They think y'all are crazy. I know. This stuff really hits on MSNBC or with a very certain segment of liberal wine moms who reward you on Instagram or whatever, or maybe are your small dollar donors, but like most of the country thinks that's crazy. Is astounded you actually just said that. But it's actually about more than word choice, and it's actually about more than just like one awkward or clunky soundbite from this one congresswoman. To me, this does tie into that theme of Democrats and the center left in America denying biology and reality. I have absolutely nothing against women working in manufacturing. If they want to do that, like, great, awesome. Like, I'm an old school feminist in that I believe in pretty much absolute social and governmental and legal equality between the sexes. Men and women, pretty much everything, with maybe some rare exceptions, should be open to whoever's interested in it. But there will never be a world where manufacturing or physical labor or other sorts of certain types of fields are perfectly 50-50 in their gender composition. You can even look at some of the most egalitarian and feminist societies like in Scandinavia and in parts of Europe, and there still are gender differences in the aggregate. There may be an individual who, is a woman, but is super into like manufacturing and building stuff and wants to go work in a factory or a plant, and great. Like, I have no issue with that. I think that's awesome. But there's always going to be more men in manufacturing than women. If it's 13%, if it's 25% women, whatever it may be, it will never be 50-50. It just won't, because that requires you thinking that males and females are basically the same, when in fact they're incredibly different on everything from a social to genetic to biological level. And so the outcomes are never going to be perfectly cookie cutter 50-50. And the problem is that they then use these kinds of disparities as proof of some sort of discrimination, but they don't actually prove that. They just prove that different groups are different. Now, there may be some discrimination that women face in manufacturing. There may be some barriers to entry or, like a boys club vibe or something like that. And I don't support that. Like I said, I want equal access for everyone. But under their vision, like, they have such a naive view of gender and sex in society that they're going to keep telling us we live in a patriarchy until manufacturing is 50-50. But that will never happen. So they just have a perpetual victim narrative into perpetuity that's unfalsifiable, basically. That's a serious problem and concerns me more than just one ridiculous soundbite from some crackhead congresswoman in Illinois. What do you guys think? Can you believe she actually said that? Let me know in the comments. And now we got to check in with right-wing pundit and Daily Wire host Matt Walsh, because he's officially lost his mind. Matt is supposed to be, like the other guys at the Daily Wire, a conservative. And in the American political tradition, that means conserving American institutions, defending our Constitution, our republic, wanting to conserve the elements of our founding and our history that are under attack from leftists, liberals, progressives, what may be. Instead, we now have these new MAGA nationalists who still call themselves conservatives, like Matt, actively trying to dismantle and tear down important parts of our republic and our system. It might sound like I'm exaggerating, but we're going to play some clips from Matt and you'll hear exactly what he had to say. He basically thinks that because the Trump administration and Elon and Doge are hitting some legal roadblocks with some of the things they're trying to do, with judges ordering them, freezing programs like, oh, you can't stop that yet. Well, freeze that while we litigate it. And they're running into a bunch of rulings blocking them on the things they're trying to do, closing down agencies, cutting waste. Some of what, some of these rulings may be wrong. But the normal approach, in keeping with the rule of law and preserving our republic, is to appeal them and get them overturned and then move forward with your priorities. But Matt Walsh and others like him are instead calling on Trump to go full authoritarian and say, no, I'll just ignore the courts and do whatever the heck I want, actually. Take a listen to what Matt had to say.
Judges are not infallible. They can deliberately and maliciously violate the Constitution, just like anyone else can. And when that happens, when a judicial coup is underway, a response is necessary. We're not talking about one or two bad rulings here. We're not talking about rulings that block a handful of policy goals or anything like that. We're at the point where the president is not being allowed to do anything. He can't even edit a website. Left-wing judges are issuing emergency injunctions on everything without even deciding actual cases. You know, the only way to get us out from under this judicial tyranny is for Trump to disregard these orders and for Congress to impeach the judges responsible for them. Throughout our history, there have only been a handful of times when presidents have needed to consider drastic actions like that. The country was clearly better off because Andrew Jackson did it. And now, 2 centuries later, it's equally clear that this country would be better off if the Trump administration followed in Jackson's footsteps and dared these judges to enforce these rulings. They can't do it, obviously. You know, they complain and issue more injunctions and more opinions. Fine. Meanwhile, the rest of us, people who want to see this country improve, will get exactly what we voted for.
Hey, so that's actually insane. And most Trump voters did not vote for the destruction of our republic and our system of checks and balances as we know it. They did not vote for destroying the judicial branch as an entity and its ability to check and limit the president's power, which, by the way, if Trump does, is therefore no longer in place for the next Democratic president, who can then just ignore court rulings they think are wrong or bad. And of course, Matt's not wrong that judges can be wrong about things and are fallible, but that's why appeals exist. That's why you appeal it. And we have a frickin' 6-3 conservative majority Supreme Court that if you appeal these rulings and they're truly wrong, will eventually overturn them. But you're just impatient. And so because you're so committed to instantly trying to achieve these short-term policy goals, you would have us just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just start ignoring judges' rulings. That's fine. Presidents do whatever they want. Judicial branch no longer a check on the executive and its overreach. That is insane. And it is destructive. And it is the furthest possible thing from conservative in any sense of wanting to conserve American institutions or our system and our republic. And there is a real problem with the overuse of these emergency injunctions, the temporary restraining orders that go into place nationwide from one federal judge. But the Supreme Court actually has the ability to rein in that practice. And let's be clear, that practice was used extensively against Joe Biden by Republicans who brought cases in Texas federal courts and had nationwide injunctions declared against Biden's different policies. In fact, the court specifically blocked Biden's COVID vaccine mandate he tried to force on the workforce, his $400 billion attempt to cancel student loans with taxpayer money without Congress, and even his nationwide eviction moratorium. All of that was struck down by the courts. But under the framework that Matt Walsh is describing, Biden could have just said, whatever. Yeah, I don't care about what the courts say. I can do whatever I want. That's not a president bound by the rule of law. That is a dictator. And to positively cite Andrew Jackson, who ignored the Supreme Court that ruled against his efforts in the Indian Removal Act, to set the stage for the Trail of Tears, one of the darkest stains in American history, where thousands of Cherokee Native Americans were killed and died from disease, and just in this absolute horrific stain on American history. He defied the courts so that they could go through with that under his successor ultimately. But that's what happened. And you're saying the country was obviously better off because we did the Trail of Tears and defied the Supreme Court in order to go through with it. What on earth? Are you on crack? Or is this just conservative media now? Just saying the edgiest shit imaginable, defending the indefensible, endorsing evil to own the libs. It really is so deeply hypocritical and partisan. And that came through when Matt talked about how Democrats are now suddenly concerned about following court rulings and the rule of law. And I don't think he realized this, but he basically was like, yeah, so I'm just like them. I'm just like AOC and others on the left who've called to defy court rulings. I'm now going to be the same as them and call myself a conservative. Take a listen.
When the courts speak, you just have to honor their judge, no matter what they say. No matter what. If a federal judge tomorrow issues a ruling saying that, everybody has to wear a red shirt on Tuesday, well, he just got to do it. The fact that he has no power to issue that ruling and no power to enforce it, and he's way outside the bounds of the Constitution, doesn't matter. He's a judge in a robe. He said it, so we all got to do it. I mean, that's what Chuck Schumer is saying. But if you remember, just a couple of years back, Democrats like Chuck Schumer were standing in front of the Supreme Court threatening individual judges over their rulings. AOC was telling Anderson Cooper that Biden should just ignore Supreme Court rulings, and he did. He admitted the court had struck down his plan to cancel student loans, for example, so he just went ahead and did it anyway. Now these same Democrats are maintaining that judges should never be questioned under any circumstances.
So it's just an absolute straw man here. Nobody is saying judges can't be questioned or challenged. That's literally what an appeal process is. And these rulings can ultimately all be appealed to a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. So you just sound ridiculous, Matt. And does he not sense the irony or the hypocrisy that as a supposed conservative, he now finds himself on the same page as AOC, who, yes, wanted Biden to openly defy a judicial ruling that restricted access to abortion medication, and he didn't. He did not listen to her. But that should show you as a conservative why you actually want a judicial review system in place, because it constrains progressives who otherwise could just go haywire. Matt's like, no, actually, AOC had a point. AOC kind of ate with that. In reality, if you're a right-wing MAGA conservative and you're agreeing with AOC, that should be a red flag that you've gone hopelessly astray. And I'm sorry, but what Matt says here about Biden defying the Supreme Court to do student loan cancellation is just completely incorrect and misleading. I was a huge opponent of Biden's student debt bailouts. Like, I literally wrote so many op-eds about this, talked about it on TV, blasted it. I was so against it. It was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court struck it down as such. And that program, that $400 billion bailout, never went forward. Biden abided by the ruling. As the law professor Ilya Soman explains for Reason.com, some defenders of Trump's actions cite Biden's policies on student loan forgiveness as a kind of precedent. Biden did boast that the Supreme Court's correct ruling in Biden v. Missouri, quote, didn't stop me from forgiving student loans. Nonetheless, when the court ruled that he didn't have the authority to engage in massive loan forgiveness under the 2003 HEROES Act, Biden obeyed the ruling. He did then try to engage in large-scale loan forgiveness under another statute, the Higher Education Act. But when courts predictably ruled that Biden couldn't do a massive loan forgiveness plan under the HEA either, Biden obeyed those rulings as well. So to be clear, Biden tried to cancel a bunch of loans under a certain statute, under certain executive authority. That was struck down. He obeyed the ruling. Then he tried again, which he really shouldn't have. He really should have taken no for an answer under a different statute with different presidential authorities. That too was restricted, and he was only eventually able to cancel a relatively small amount of student loans through some existing statutes and authorities that were upheld. So he did not defy the Supreme Court. That is partisan, tribal nonsense. Although, I'm a huge critic of what he actually did do. But if people like Matt Walsh get their way, the next Democratic president could defy the Supreme Court, could do whatever the heck they want, and would have no real check on their power. If you actually are okay with that and want to enable that just to achieve some short-term outcomes in policy initiatives and areas in your audits and your DOGE projects, just to achieve them now rather than have to wait and appeal bad court rulings, that's insane and delusional and would destroy our system as we know it. Thankfully, at least so far, Trump does not seem to be taking the advice of people like Matt Walsh and says he will be respecting court rulings.
If a judge does block one of your policies, part of your agenda, will you abide by that ruling? Will you comply?
Well, I always abide by the courts, and then I'll have to appeal it.
That's good news for America that, at least so far, people like Matt Walsh aren't getting their way and destroying our republic. What do you think? Do you somehow agree with Matt? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button while you're at it. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me, and we'll talk again real soon.